I just got a text from a friend, and he said, I was talking to him about listening back to some of these rambles that I do, and I curse way too much. It's funny, though. I grew up... Well, first off, let me say what he said. He said the first thing is that you notice it. I was like, yeah, I do. And I'm like, why do I fucking curse so much? See, I just did it then. But at the end of the day, it's going to be hard for me to filter out these kind of verbalizations of how I express my emotions. I don't curse in anger, right? So, like, the house I grew up in, I had a mom from the Bronx, and man, that woman could spit fire. And growing up, like, in that environment, every other word out of her mouth is fuck. So I curse a lot, and I started thinking, I'm like, well, do I curse a lot in my writing? I do. But here's the thing, right? Every single person loves Samuel L. Jackson. I don't know anyone who, like, has for some reason doesn't like that guy. Nothing bad ever came out about him. He's been in Hollywood forever, and it seems like no one has ever said a bad word about the dude. But all that dude says is fuck. I mean, like, that is his whole thing. That's his shtick. Like, that dude says fuck the way I say, And hearing back and listening back to these podcasts and these ramblings, that, besides the gross sound of my own voice, you hear these, inflections and these curse words and these, habits of speech. And I think, is there a habit in my writing, again, specifically cursing? The rock and roll book that I'm working on, again, because all this podcast really is just therapy in order for me to finish this book. But this book has just been, it's been grinding me down. I've written, 17 short stories in the meantime. I've written a novella, published a novella, started 2 other novels, and I'm still working on this book. And so now, great. So now I have to have this next wave of insecurity through this next draft that I'm working on. Am I cursing too much? And my thing is, there's nothing I love more really than laughing. I love laughing my fucking ass off. Before, the corona thing, the pandemic, whatever, I was going to stand-up comedy clubs by myself at least once a month. Anyone who was coming in through town that I was stoked to see, I was going to go. The last show I saw it was at Punchline. Saw Mark Norman, sat in the back. I've seen Dave Chappelle at the Punchline, and I saw him bring Chris Rock on stage. But laughing to me has always been, one of my favorite things to do. So part of comedy and comedic value is cursing. And I feel like if I'm going to have any people enjoy listening to this shit, I have to be funny. The book world is anything but funny. There is really nothing funny about it. And that's a bummer because there's a lot of writers who write really funny shit. And, is it for lack of, offending people? We're talking about the written word. The written word is the anchor to a lot of, it's the anchor to opinion. It's the anchor to emotion and feeling. Verbalizing things has always been human instinct. But like growing up in this house of just, heavy curse words. And again, not necessarily in a wave of anger, but more so, this guy's not going, but more so a way of expressing, maybe it was anger, but it's what it is. And I'm going to try to be, I guess, a little more conscious of my cursing, but then again, I'm driving in this van, literally talking to no one. So it's going to be hard for me to not, say that, or say fuck. But we want it to be fun. I want it to be light. I'm learning in these, in these interviews, talking to authors, and some are down for, getting a little humorous, and some aren't. It's all good. I'm always going to go for the joke, always. There's always something funny to be had, even in the most serious of times. Follow us always on Instagram. Let's get those follows up. It's Writing Friction. I'm going to tell you to follow me on Twitter, but I don't ever use Twitter. But I think I got to start tweeting some stuff out. And always please tell your friends. Check out the back episodes. And I will see you all next time. Thanks. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Writing Friction. Today's guest, as always, is pretty cool. I have on the phone all the way from Alaska, Eowyn Ivey. What's going on, Eowyn?
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
No, most definitely. What's going on in your corner of America?
Well, it's I think probably what a lot of people are dealing with. In ways, very quiet, but a lot of craziness in the rest of the world. Yeah, so my little piece is very quiet. So that's a good thing, I guess.
Were you born and raised in Alaska?
So my parents moved up here when I was about 4, I think. So my whole memory life is in Alaska. I grew up here, and my husband and I went away for college down to Washington State, but then ended up coming straight back home again. So we've been here ever since.
My sister lived in Anchorage for about...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she met a guy, and then she left. But she was there for about, almost 6 months. I never had the chance to go out there. It's kind of that, What a crazy place. Even when you look on a map, and the first thing I thought about when, we were going to start talking about is, and you write about it, but how important is Alaska to everything in your life, most especially, your writing?
Yeah, it is definitely very essential, I think, in what I do as a writer. I think that, and I've kind of said this before, I feel like sometimes as a fiction writer, I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around what Alaska is to me personally, and sort of its complex history and where we're at now. It's just it's funny when you grow up here. I think a lot of us sort of take it for granted. We think, like we all do. Every place is like where I live, right? It's like you don't have any, you don't really have a sense. I mean, I went on vacations with my family sometimes, but I didn't really get just how different Alaska was.
Where was vacation?
Well, because we had family in New York and Alabama, different places. So we would do some little traveling trips when I was a kid. Not a lot, though.
Yeah.
And it's different to live someplace versus just visiting. And I think really it was the most eye-opening when I went away to college. My husband and I went down to Washington, and everyone said, "Oh, you won't be homesick because it's just like Alaska down there." Well, it was nothing. It was nothing like Alaska. I mean, there were things I loved about it, but I think that was sort of a clarifying time for me where I realized, no, I want to be in Alaska, and I want to figure out why does it have this hold on me that I can't quite understand,
It's interesting. I mean, do you think you'd be the same writer if you were living in Cleveland?
Yeah, I find those kind of questions really interesting, because the truth is, I think writers, not all, a lot of writers write from that place of trying to understand their community and their the landscape they grew up in, whether that's a big city or whatever. So I think we're driven by the same things, but certainly my subject matter would be very different. But I almost suspect that wherever I had grown up, maybe I would have this feeling of wanting to understand it better, maybe. I don't know. It's an interesting question.
It is. Yeah, I mean, like, I was born in Queens, but then we moved to northern New Jersey, where they film, like, The Sopranos. So that's where I grew up.
Yeah, right.
So that has heavily affected my personality, for better or for worse. So I wrote my first book was published in February, and I've been living in I've been living in San Francisco, literally right before the pandemic.
Right. Wow. Right. Yeah. Well, congratulations on the book.
Thanks,
that's exciting.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's great.
But having lived in New Jersey, northern New Jersey, for 2/3 of my life, even after having lived in San Francisco for almost a decade, I was still writing a book about New Jersey. Like,
yeah, and it's interesting you say that about being in San Francisco. I mean, I don't know if you had this experience, but I think sometimes getting away from the place that you know so well and being somewhere else, then you actually can almost look back a little better at the place that you know, when you grow up someplace. I don't know, did you have that feeling when you got to California? Did it change how you viewed, were you able to see your own home state a little differently? Or?
Most definitely.
Yeah.
An old roommate of mine kind of summed this up for me best. He was like, it's like pulling the camera back. And I was able to get out of that, you know, that literal swamp. And now that when I get out of there, when I go back, they're the things I'm able to pick away from that I love about it. And I'm able to almost appreciate the things I don't like about it. But like with anything, that kind of conflict, right? Like it's easy to write about me, you know, a guy putting cheese on my bacon and egg sandwich when I didn't ask for cheese. Like that's a very that's a very New Jersey thing. But and something, you know, that obviously like, you know, drives me insane, but you can write about that. With Alaska though, I mean, I feel like if I was, you know, I've never been to Alaska. I'm just assuming that I can sit, you know, for the most part, look out my window. Like right now I'm looking at an ambulance and a munibus. I'm assuming you're looking at, you know, maybe a tree with some deer roaming by, you know, so.
So right now what I'm looking at is leaves, yellow leaves on the birch trees that are mostly knocked off, and there's a little bit of snow on the mountains in the distance, and mostly just trees. That's mostly what I can see. We have neighbors, but we're in the middle of about 40 acres, so we can't see, you know, it's funny, our neighborhood's close-knit in terms of doing stuff together and helping each other out, but we can't see we can't see each other.
Is that kind of what, when you look at, I mean, you know, this kind of leads me off to a couple of questions. One, do you write at home?
Yeah, I do. You know, and I was thinking about, when we were thinking about getting ready to talk, I was thinking about, like, I think one of the questions that comes up right now is, like, has your life changed a lot by the pandemic?
Sure.
And mine really isn't. I mostly, you know, since my first book came out, The Snow Child, I have pretty much been at home as a full-time writer. Now, there's little things I do miss. Like, I do have a little coffee shop. Our nearest town is Palmer. It's about 30 miles away. And if I'm really actively writing, like on a Friday, I'll give myself this treat that, hey, I can go down to the coffee shop and get a piece of pie and a latte and write there. Oh, they've got lots of good pies. They have apple pie that's actually really good.
I'm a fan.
And it's kind of fun for me because I grew up in this town, so people come and go and say hi to me as they're coming and going. You know, sometimes they'll sit down and talk with me for a little bit, but I get some writing done, and that was sort of a reward to myself if I'd spent every day home writing before that. But of course, I'm not doing that right now, so that's probably one of the. But mostly, you know, the same thing. I used to go to the library sometimes to write, but mostly I'm at home writing. I mean, I don't know if you find this, but the truth is, once I'm in the mode, it doesn't really matter where I am. I mean, it's just a matter of trying to get yourself in that mode is the tough part sometimes.
Yes, it's something I beat to death on this podcast. It's like the idea of, you know, stretching out your muscles, right? So no matter every time I'm going to sit down to write, I know it doesn't make a difference if I'm in my apartment, at a cafe, you know, on an airport floor. Like, it's going to take me 15, 20 minutes to get into that groove anyways. And I remember, you know, when I first started writing, I was, you know, I had this superstitious idea of like, well, you can only write at this desk at this time, and you know, you got to, and it's just like that's just not that's not a reality anymore. You know, so
I do think I think, you know, and I'm like a sucker for these books about, you know, writers' rituals, the things authors do, you know, that always, you know, whether it was Hemingway who always stood up when he wrote or whatever, you know, I always find those things really interesting, and I think sometimes those little tricks can maybe help us get into a trance of writing. But the truth is, once you're going, you're just going, and I feel like I found that I have to be a little bit flexible. You know, it was like during the summer, my whole family was home, and so I couldn't have the complete silence that I'm used to as a writer, and I just was like, okay, well, I've got to adapt to this. You know, sometimes things get thrown at you, and you're like, okay, this isn't my normal writing experience, but this is where I'm at now.
Was that a thing Hemingway did? Did he write standing up?
I think so. You know, there's a great book, I think it's called Rituals.
Ooh, okay.
That's the name of it. Yeah, and it just talks about all these funny little things. And there was some writer, and I'm drawing a blank now, but he would get up in the morning, get dressed, race out of the door like he was going to a 9-to-5 job, and then come back inside and sit down to write. And it's funny, I can kind of relate to that because I miss the adrenaline of working as a newspaper reporter. I worked for about 10 years as a newspaper reporter before I was a bookseller, and there is a little bit of adrenaline you get when you know you've got a deadline, or you're like, hey, I've got this amount of time to get this done. And I don't have that kind of pressure. I have a long-term, when you're working on a novel, it's a much longer game that you're looking at. So to get those little adrenaline rushes, I've actually thought about trying that trick, but I haven't yet.
That's well, you talked about being a newspaper reporter. A book I'm reading right now, I'm almost finally done with it. It's called Homicide. It was written by David Simon, and he created the television show The Wire.
I knew I recognized his name, but I haven't read the book.
And so he was on the beat, West Baltimore, in the police station, but the way he writes about it, I mean, he's writing almost like fictitiously about nonfiction in a way.
Right. I know exactly what you mean.
And it keeps you so enthralled. Do you think, talking to you about it now, all those years spent, writing in the newsroom, how did that shape your writing fiction?
Yeah, I absolutely think it helped me. I mean, it's a craft like anything else, and I think that was. I started out as a creative writing major, and I wasn't getting what I wanted to out of the program, and I switched to journalism, and this was my, earning my bachelor's degree. Switched to journalism, and what I loved about it is like, okay, we're going to roll up our sleeves and learn how to do a job. It just felt much more hands-on, practical. You got to get the sentences written and get them done quickly and make them coherent. And I think all that time, I think a lot about, is it Malcolm Gladwell that talks about like 10,000 hours?
Yeah, it's one of those dudes.
Somebody like that. This idea that you've got to put the amount, that there is this amount of time that it takes of doing something to get good at it. And I believe in that because I think that did help me. Now, that being said, I think when I left the newspaper business, it was a good move for me because I didn't really want to write journalism. That wasn't what I loved to read. I realized I didn't want to write nonfiction, like a book-length nonfiction. I've always loved fiction. So there was a point where I was like, okay, this has been great. I've learned a lot, but it's not really what I want to do, and so that was when I kind of made the switch. But
did it kind of put a discipline in you? I mean, I can only imagine.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it had to.
And I think, too, that it made me feel... I don't know, I felt like in the creative writing department I was in danger of feeling like my words were a little too precious. Do you know what I mean? There's something about a newspaper business where you write a story, the next day it's either in the paper or maybe it's not. Maybe it's junked because something bigger came along or you just didn't do a good enough job on the story. And there's a sense that, I remember I had one editor who would say, don't take this too seriously. Tomorrow it's going to be lining someone's bird cage. It was like... Yeah, and it's true. It's like, okay, it's a job. It's a story to tell. You do the best you can, but don't, I got very much used to being edited and criticized and sometimes not very kindly by readers that disagreed or thought I hadn't done a good job. And it made me anyways feel like, okay, I got pretty thick skin. I can take this. I can try to make my work better. And I didn't believe that my writing was like, God's gift to man. I knew
of course.
that other people could help me make it better, and I think that was a good lesson for me too.
You talk about having thick skin. I mean, especially with writing writing fiction, writing lengthy novels. I mean, you have to have thick skin because you get so emotionally involved with your work that if you don't, I mean, it'll cripple you beyond belief. I always talk about stand-up comedians being on stage, right? Like if you tell a joke and it doesn't work, immediately, right? So you're talking about having this immediate feedback from editors and things like that and growing a thick skin. It's so important, I think, for our own mental well-being to have a thick skin as a creative too, right? Because when you're dealing with doubt and all that kind of shit, and you're just dealing with that kind of stuff.
No, absolutely. No, I don't want to make it sound like I'm a better person than I am. The truth is, when I've been working on a novel for a long time and I turn it into my agent or to an editor, and they're like, "Yeah, we're excited about this, but man, this whole part needs to be changed." It breaks my heart. And also I feel defensive and like, man, am I just really a crappy writer? But then I have to sit there for a minute and be like, no, you know what? They might not know how I can fix it, but the fact that they're seeing a problem is valid, and I need to figure out how to work through it, you know. And at the same time, there's other times where I'm like, no, you know what? I disagree with that criticism. I'm gonna stand my guns on this one and say, no, this is how I want it. And I have done that some, but truly, mostly I found that good readers are right when they see that something's not working. And again, I don't think they usually have the answer for you, because it just doesn't, I found personally it doesn't work that way. If they say, well, why don't you try this or try fixing it that way, that's not usually what will work. But if I put my brain to it, I can usually find some way to fix the problem they've identified. And I do think that goes back to journalism and just, you know, knowing that it can always be better. You know, I tend to be somebody who, I finish something and I want to move on. I want to be done with it. And
I'm from New Jersey.
And the editing process for me is being like, okay, no, I can work through this some more, and it can be refined, you know.
But it's being open to that criticism. I mean, I've been writing a couple of short stories recently, only because, you know, so I own a dog walking business. That's how I pay my rent.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. Right. So, you know, it awards me some, you know, a good amount of free time right now after work. So I've been working on one novel, but, you know, in order to kind of keep my mind fresh, I've been doing these short stories. I wrote one, submitted it to the New Yorker, and they immediately rejected it, right? And wait. I mean, you know, it's been talked about ad nauseum on this podcast, but like that rejection, you know, to me, like you could either be the kind of person where you know, you turn down, you're like, well, maybe, you know, like you said, maybe I'm just a crappy writer, maybe, you know, or you can just use it to keep going forward and have that kind of discipline.
It's hard. I mean, and like, again, I love books about writing, and I think in Stephen King's On Writing,
that's what I was going to say.
A lot about rejection, you know, and I found that really helpful. And that's the trick of it, is somehow to let the rejection come in enough to see, okay, do they have a valid point? Is there some valid reason that this isn't succeeding? And then at the same time, to have the sort of gumption to keep going, you know, and it's hard. It really, it's a tough, and I found that I guess maybe there was some part of me that thought like, oh, once you publish one book, then that part of the process is over. But it's not. There's still a lot of rejection and people telling you it's not good enough. You got to make it better, you know. And it's hard. And I think it does sort of. I mean, the one thing is, I think it weeds out the people that don't just love the writing part of it. You know, like if you're only going to stick it out if you really, really just love the writing process.
Oh yeah.
Somewhat. Because otherwise it can be pretty unrewarding.
Oh, I mean, every day is just an uphill battle of absolute drudgery.
I
mean, you mentioned, only because you mentioned it, Stephen King's On Writing. I mean, that was the book that made me think I could be a writer. You know, I mean, it's like it's half bio, half advice. And the advice, I mean, he's just very matter of fact. He talks about, you know, submitting that first novel while he was teaching, you know, getting rejected in the beginning. And, you know, there's a couple of authors. What was the name of the book you had mentioned just before? Rituals?
Yeah, I wish. Oh, yeah, here it is. Actually, I've got a whole bookshelf here of all my writing books.
Exactly.
It's called Daily Rituals.
Okay.
How Artists Work by Mason Curry, and it's just it's just a fun one because it's just all these little snippets of the crazy fun things that authors have done. You know, famous authors, and on writing. And I have found too that certain books at certain times really speak to me, and then years later I can go back to them, and it's like for whatever reason they don't ring out the same way. You know, I think it's certain phases, but I'll have to say Stephen King's On Writing is one that I've gone back to a few times, and I just find, you know, he just got a great, very personable approach, you know, that makes you feel like, okay, he's a real human being and he got through this.
Oh, yeah. For anyone who doesn't know about Stephen King's history, I mean, that dude was one of the gnarliest dudes ever. I mean, we're talking about rituals. I think his ritual was drinking 38 beers, a gram of cocaine, and like 17 Slayer records every night. You know, like he talks about extensively, you know, he had a huge substance abuse problem, but he also he talks about something that's very interesting to me that I can't do at all. He wrote with music blasting, which is fine, but he had music that had lyrics. I can't, when I'm writing, I can't listen to anything with lyrics at all.
Yeah, it's funny. I go through phases. I've had times where the right songs at the right time, I'll have a playlist and I can listen to it. And then other times it's like I can't even have, a squirrel squeaking outside.
Literally,
is going to drive me crazy.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. So you
Yeah.
say you write at your house. Do you write every day? You write at the same time? Any kind of routine for you?
Yeah, I mean, I try. Like right now, I have a deadline. I have a contract for my next book, and it's due in about a year. So I've kind of got it spaced out in my head how many words I need to progress forward, each day. And so I do. I try to write, in the morning. I'm not a morning person. So when I say
You're
morning,
not.
I mean like 10. No, I am not a morning person. I get up with my husband and daughter and get them off to school and work, and then I go back to bed.
Do you really? Oh my God! I get up at 5:45 and I start writing at 6, and I start writing at 6:15.
Oh my word! I wish I was that kind of person. I really do. I really admire people who are morning people, and I always thought that maybe when I got older, I would, I always think of people who are more responsible, and I thought, well, maybe, but I never have. So I'm talking like 10 o'clock. So I'll write from like 10 to noon. I find I cannot write for more than a couple hours, and I mean like seriously just sitting at the computer writing.
Yeah.
I kind of reach a burnout point, but
Yeah.
then, I'll go for a hike or I'll do some laundry or whatever, and I find my brain still percolating along, like thinking about it. So I have come to realize when I'm really engaged with my story, I'm really working on it all the time in the back of my head. It's just that I'm not at my desk. But back to, I think you might have mentioned something a minute ago, like you got to sit down I find I got to sit down at the desk every day. I got to engage with the manuscript in order to keep, and if something comes along and I'm away from it for a week or so, I get a little intimidated by it. I start to feel like, man, maybe I don't know what I'm doing, and maybe this is a crappy story idea, and it takes me a few days to get back over that feeling. So I try really hard, and I treat it kind of like a job, a 9 to 5. I work Monday through Friday. I don't tend to work on it during the weekends. But that's a luxury I understand. I mean, when I was writing The Snow Child, I was working, we had a brand new baby and our older daughter, and then it was a matter of like, I'm going to squeeze in an hour, in the evening while my husband puts the kids to bed, and that was a very different time in my life where I had to just write when I had the time, so it's sort of this luxury that I have now where I can be like, I'm going to write from 10 till noon.
I mean, but you said you're doing it every day. Like, it's amazing. The more authors I talk to, the more different things I hear. Like, again, I'm the same way. Like, I need to write, at the same time every day, whatever kind of personality type that is. But I recently was talking to, Rebecca Mackay. Yeah. I was recently speaking with her, and she's like, I don't write every day. She's like, I write when I want to write. And, you could talk to another authors like I write because I'm looking at the bills on my desk.
Absolutely. Well, and that's why I'm actually uncomfortable like giving writing, quote unquote, writing advice because I realize that there are, even in my own life as a writer, my approach has changed, my reasons have changed, my motivation has changed. Like, like you say, sometimes you're writing because you need to get the bills paid and you've got some freelance work or you've got whatever, other times it's like purely for fun and it's just something you're experimenting with and how we go about it and what works. Like, I just feel like the only thing I do find helpful is I personally have found it helpful to just read what other authors do, partly because it kind of gives me the freedom to do, I have this realization of like, basically I just need to do what works for me in this moment, in this time, like right now, this is what works, but maybe tomorrow I'm going to have to find a new approach, but absolutely, there's people that say you have to keep a journal, like you should always keep a journal. I've tried so many times to keep a journal, and I have all these abandoned journals around my house where I've like started, I'll start October 1st, blah, 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 and then I think, who the hell cares, and so I think like if keeping a daily journal works for you, fantastic. If it doesn't, that's fine too.
The journal thing is never, ever. I mean, I write. I'm always writing on my phone. So like voice. When ideas pop into my head, like voice memos, notes. Like if I'm walking dogs in the woods, I will.
Right.
That's my dog barking right now. Let me. We're gonna pause it, and then we're gonna let her come out to the cage, and we'll come right back. Hold on one sec.
Okay.
But the taking the journal thing that's never worked for me, and writing on my phone, again, the way my life is right now, it was kind of like how you were talking about writing your first book. I don't have a child, but I have this puppy that we just had to pause the episode for.
That's a full-time job.
Yeah. No, and I also work a full-time job. And I also need to find time to read. I try to read every day. Yeah, so the economy of time is, I'm always talking about that. And it's interesting to hear that you did your first book that way. Do you like look back on it now and like have these, romantic, ideas of how it was back then? Or was it kind of just like you said, like, I have 1 hour, I got to do this shit, just do it every day?
Yeah. Well, I think the part of what really motivated me during that time is I kind of felt like this little hour that I got was such a precious gift to me, because my husband was like, I'm going to juggle the kids. I'm going to get the baby to sleep and help our older kid. So it was a gift that he was giving to me, and I knew I would feel guilty if I was, just playing solitaire on the computer
of course.
So it was like I had to do it. And the truth is, in ways, it's harder now to motivate myself because I have all day and I have all week. And so sometimes it's a little easy to be like, and I almost feel like the discipline is more important now. I have to just make myself sit down because otherwise a week can go by and I haven't got anything done. And like I was saying, then I get intimidated. I get scared of the storyline somehow. I don't know how to explain it. It's a weird feeling, but so I know that I just need to keep staying engaged with the story and keep thinking about it. And when you mentioned about reading, like even the reading I'm doing, I'm naturally drawn to things that I think will feed into the information I want for my story or whatever, so it starts to all, like my thinking life starts to all revolve around the story, which is when I know that I'm doing the work I need to do, I think,
Well, sure, yeah, and like, for me, and maybe it's the same for you, but when I read, I get inspired.
Absolutely.
So I'm going, I'm late to the game, but I'm going through all of Cormac McCarthy's catalog.
Oh, yeah, I love Cormac McCarthy. He's such a stylist. Like, I just find his this very spare poetry is just incredible. And he's a dangerous one for me though, because I find like if I'm reading a lot of him and I'm going back to the page, I'll start to kind of mimic some of his, and I'm like, oh wait,
you took the words out of my mouth, and what I mean, and like what I mean by that is deleting all of my commas.
Like, well, and it's interesting because when I was writing The Snow Child, my first book, I ended up that one of my main characters is the Snow Child, and I ended up getting rid of all my quotation marks where she was part of the conversation, and that was partly realizing, it's funny how, and I think Stephen King talks about that, the idea that like you're gathering tools, you're filling your toolbox, and to realize when you read someone like Cormac McCarthy that you can do whole different things with punctuation and quotation marks, and just realizing that that's an option. It might seem obvious, but it didn't seem obvious to me, I guess, until I was reading it, and I was like, oh, you could just ditch all this, and it was like, okay, maybe you don't do it all the time, or maybe you just facilitate, utilize it in certain ways, but it can be a useful tool to have.
Always, and I'm always saying you have to be a good reader to be a good writer, in my opinion. And
I agree. I agree.
Yeah, and being a good reader is what you're talking about right now. It's like, here's a style. Maybe I can get inspired by this and use a little bit of this in my own writing. Cormac McCarthy is an extreme example because he's so singular in his voice that if you do end up like writing like him, you just sound like him. He's like,
exactly.
But I remember when the first book I read was All the Pretty Horses, and I don't think there's a comma.
Oh, I think that's my favorite, actually.
There's not a comma, I don't think, in the first 7 pages of the book.
Yeah.
But it's just like the way it keeps you going. It's just constantly going. So I want to actually talk about a quick little left turn. So your book, The Snow Child, obviously, was very successful and helped with a lot of things. It was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, right?
Right.
What was that experience like? I mean, is that even something worth talking about?
Well, it was just insane, really.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is I was always a reader before I was a writer. Like, growing up, I loved to read. And when I was working as a newspaper reporter, I was reading, everything I could get my hands on. And I would watch for the Pulitzer list because I knew they were books that I loved.
And especially as a journalist, too.
and yeah, exactly. And the Pulitzer has a huge amount of meeting in the news room. But so I knew that the list was coming out that spring, but I assumed. I mean, first of all, it just never occurred to me that my book would be on it. But also, I would have assumed that like the people would have been notified weeks ahead of time, right? That they were on this list. So the day came out, they were announcing the Pulitzer finalists, and then they announced at the same time the two finalists and the winner. It's just there's no like long list, short list. It's just all at once. And so I'm on. You know, I get up in the morning and I turn on the computer, and I can't wait to see what the Pulitzer list is. And I get an email at that moment from my publicist saying, "Hey, you're a finalist."
Fucking crazy.
For the Snow Child's a finalist for the Pulitzer, and I was like, "You gotta be!" It was the most surreal thing. And I called my mom. My mom actually has since passed away, but she was my writing partner, and she was a poet, and we talked to each other every day about writing. And I called her and I told her, and I've been known to be a bit of a prankster, and I had played a lot of April Fool's jokes on her and done things. And she said, "You're shitting me.
Yeah.
I don't believe you." And I was like, "Oh, thanks, Mom.
Crazy.
A lot of confidence you have in me."
That's crazy.
But yeah, it was surreal. But then, of course, the funny thing about it is it really, I mean, it changed my life in the sense that it continued to help propel the Snow Child to have success, and it has enabled me to write full time. But beyond that, you know, in my day-to-day life, it's not like I walk around with a sign.
Of course not. Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's something I'm hugely honored by. But yeah, it was very surreal. Very surreal.
And you talked about continuing the life of the book, and unless the internet's incorrect, they made it into a musical.
Yeah, they did.
So you got to break that down, because I'm a musician. I've been playing guitar my whole life.
Nice.
And, yeah, well, musicals have always been a weird thing with me.
I was shocked when musicals are strange. It's a very different format.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. What happened is Perseverance Theater up here in Alaska. The woman who had helped establish it had then moved on to Washington, D.C. and started up Arena Stage in Washington, D.C. But Perseverance Theater up here in Alaska and Arena Stage started to work on this together, of wanting to put together the musical of The Snow Child. And to be honest, I was a little skeptical. I mean, I'm actually even a little, you know, it's been optioned for a film too, and I'm a little like, I'm excited, but I'm also a little nervous about that prospect. You know, I think we've all experienced, you know, a book that we love, and then we see the movie and we're like, so it's hard. I was apprehensive about it, and with the musical, I was just like, I cannot wrap my head around this. But they ended up they actually put it on in D.C., and my husband and daughter and I went to go see it, and it was really fun. And I'll tell you, one of my favorite things about it is that and this sounds so crazy and it's hard to describe, but they had these really ethereal magic puppet kind of things that were used for some of the more fantastical elements. So, for example, the fox was a puppet, and it sounds weird when I say it, but on stage it was really magical, and the music was fun. It was kind of a more sort of a bluegrass, folksy take on. So it wasn't like your typical, you know, kind of Chicago Broadway musical. It was a much more appropriate to 1920s Alaska kind of music style. And yeah, it was a lot of fun, and it was really weird to be sitting there seeing something, you know. And I don't know, you have this feeling, but like you're when I write a book, it feels a bit like a dream, like it's something very personal that you're trying to describe and put out in the world, and then to see something that feels like an intimate dream to you translated into a musical where these people are singing the parts. I mean, it was crazy.
It's crazy. I mean, do you have any input at all in the production, like the music, or they're kind of just like, we're taking it, hope you like it?
Right. No, you know, they were really great because they involved me as much as I wanted to be involved. So to be honest, I didn't want to have any, you know, I didn't want to try to write a screen, you know, in the for example, for the movie, try to write a screenplay or try to write the dramatic parts of it, and I don't know. I mean, I love music, but I'm no musician, you know. I wasn't gonna. So they were kind enough to like let me hear parts, like as things were coming together. They would tell me their ideas, so it was nice to feel like they were very generous in letting me know what was going on. But I didn't have any interest in being involved beyond that, you know. Like I was already working. I mean, that's the other weird thing. I mean, The Snow Child, like I was actively writing it, you know, gosh, 10, 12, 15 years ago.
Yeah, no, sure.
So it feels really distant to me now.
Yeah,
and it's kind of like I have a certain, maybe this is a little harsh, but a certain impatience with it. Like by the time the musical came out, like, I was very much involved in my next book, you know, and you're always, you know what I mean? It's a funny, and I'm sure I don't know if you've experienced that yet with your book coming out, but it's funny to be talking about something that you were actively writing quite a while ago. By the time the publishing process goes through all its things, you know, it's a ways out.
Well, could you break that down a little bit if you don't mind? I mean, you know, you start writing a book, you know, how long did it take you from the first word to the final period of the final draft of the Snow Child? I mean, how long of that time?
Yeah, it's hard for me to put my fingers on, because what happened with me is I started writing it, and I was pretty excited about it, and I had been working on it for maybe, I'm guessing maybe about a year and a half. It's hard to remember exactly. And I was about 3/4 of the way done with it. And I met who ended up being my agent. I met Jeff Kleiman at a literary festival conference up here in Alaska, and he offered to represent it even though it wasn't finished.
Oh, wow.
And so then he and I ended up working on it for about a year on revisions and just getting it ready to go. And then he started submitting it here and there, but it was kind of during the recession, and he submitted a couple places, and he was like, you know what, I think this is bad timing, let's hold off for a while. And then it seems like it was maybe another year before it got bought, and then it actually came out like a year and a half after that.
I mean, do you think, you know, you're a little more involved with the traditional publishing world than I am, but do you think, I mean, is this a sluggish process? Do you think this process could be streamlined nowadays?
No, I think that it's always crazy how long it takes for a book to come out. Yeah, because they have, and I had a sense of it because I'd worked for about 10 years as a bookseller. Okay. So, you know, the time that they need to get advanced reader copies out, to get blurbs or to get reviews, and then they got to get in the catalogs, and they got to promote it to booksellers, and they're trying to have it at these different book expos. I mean, it's just a long, and then, you know, the editing process. So I edit with my agent, and then I edit with my one editor, and then I have some edits from my UK editor, and then it's like, okay, now we've got the copy editor, and we have this kind of editor. I mean, it's a long, but I'll tell you, I mean, I'm grateful for all that, because every part of the process catches little things, you fine tune, and but it's a long, so by the time, you know, and it's like every once in a while I still get asked to do a book club for the Snow Child, and I've gotten to where I'm hesitant to say yes, because I don't remember aspects of it now. I mean, it's been so, you know, I'll be like, oh wait, shoot, what character is that? You know, like, it's been a long time since I wrote it, you know, so it's a weird feeling.
Yeah, I mean, you know, musicians, again, they kind of have the same feeling too. You know, you write a record, you release a record, and then you're touring it, you know, traditionally for a year or two. You know, after 2 years, like, you got to start writing a new record, but every night you got to still play those old songs.
Exactly. I know, I have to admit, every once in a while, like up here, Kodiak, which is an island off the coast of Alaska that has a fairly good-sized community there, and their library system just chose my second book, To the Bright Edge of the World, as their community read, like one book, one read. And I was so excited because, to be honest, I get tired of talking about the Snow Child. I mean, I'm so grateful for how well it's done, and I'm so grateful for all the support from readers and booksellers, but it's like when Bright Edge of the World gets a little attention, I'm like, yay!
1,000%. Yeah, I mean, Rebecca said the same thing. Her book, The Great Believers, you know, got super popular, and she was just like, you know, I'm super grateful, you know, 2 years later to still be talking about it, but she's like, but it's 2 years later. Like, I got it, you know, like there are things going on. But especially with books, because, you know, books have such a crazy literal, I mean, that's where the term comes from, like shelf life, right? I mean, these books live on shelves forever, and, you know, for as long as bookstores are still around. Do you read every day? Are you a big reader? What are you reading right now?
Oh yeah, I'm a huge reader. I like I said, it was kind of really how I came to wanting to write was being a big reader. And like you, I try to make a point of spending some time every day reading. I also love audiobooks. I feel like audiobooks are kind of my cheater thing. I do a lot of audiobooks, like if I'm driving to pick up my daughter, or I'm washing dishes.
Is it?
It does feel like cheating. Isn't that horrible? I feel like I'm like not doing the hard work. It feels so easy, you know. Yeah. It's just, I love it. And I've gotten through some books that I wouldn't, like War and Peace not that long ago, a few years ago. What I did is I went back and forth between the hard copy. I had a hard copy, but I also had the audiobook. And so I would listen to it, and then I would sit down and read it. And it was something about the narration and the voices on the audio that really helped me get into it a lot more. You know, and then I was excited to keep going. And so audiobooks I love them.
War and Peace, that's a funny one to choose. That's interesting.
I don't know why. Well, because I Karenina, and I did have the sense that it was sort of like the Russian version of Pride and Prejudice.
Fair enough.
I don't know, maybe not so much. It's a little more, it's different, but I did really enjoy it. I'm glad that I did it, and the audiobook helped.
Yeah, no, I know some people who do audiobooks, and what they'll do is they'll do it 1.5 speed, so a little faster.
Yeah, just get through it quicker.
I mean, yeah, I'll be honest, and it's not, it's nothing, there's no reason why, but I've never listened to an audiobook in my life.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know why. You know why? I mean, I do know why, I guess. I listen to podcasts, right? So, like, to me, the book still is, in my mind, not an audio thing. But when you say it feels like cheating, to me, I agree, but I also disagree, because I feel like audiobooks are... I know a lot of my friends who have never read a book in their life, but listen to audiobooks.
Yeah. Well, I find that one thing that I think, especially because I'm sitting down writing for a few hours or a couple hours, and I just get tired of sitting. I mean, that's the truth of it. So sometimes it's hard to like sit down in a chair to read a book. But I do. There's a lot of books that don't come out in audiobooks, or books that I just want. Right now I'm reading a nonfiction, Owls of the Eastern Ice, and it might not even be an audiobook, but also I wanted the photographs and the maps and things of nonfiction, and I'm reading that. And like a lot of avid readers, I always have like 6 books going on at once. So I'm listening to one audiobook and reading this book and reading that book.
People think I'm crazy when I do that. I'm like, that makes no sense. I mean, maybe it's just the way my mind works, but I cannot read just one book at a time.
I get too tempted.
Yeah, I'm reading I'm looking at my books. I'm looking at the shelf. I'm reading 2 fiction, 1 nonfiction, a graphic novel. I just picked up Dennis Johnson, Jesus' Son. So that's a collection. Big fan of his.
He's amazing. He kind of blew my mind a little bit, actually.
Did you read Did you read Tree of Smoke?
No, I read the one that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Actually, it's his quote that I have up on my bulletin board right here that I put up, and it's from him, and it's about writing, and it says, "Write naked. That means to write what you would never say. Write in blood, as if ink is so precious you can't waste it. Write in exile, as if you are never going to get to go home again, and you have to call back every detail. You get in your teacup and take your oar and strike off for Australia, and if you wind up in Japan, you're ecstatic." I love that quote.
Dennis Johnson bringing us all together. I mean, that's crazy. That's such a good quote.
He's pretty amazing. Although I do find it hard reading in ways. I mean, it's pretty...
Dennis Johnson. Tree of Smoke is not an easy read whatsoever. But
that's why I like having a couple books going at one time, because I'll have some kind of, fun murder mystery or something going, and a nonfiction.
Oh, yeah.
And then something that's a little heavier that I feel like, okay, that's important to read, and I'm glad I did, but it's not easy,
Yeah, and again, as a writer, you have to be, you have to be spending this time reading. I couldn't even imagine doing it any other way.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I always am hesitant to say, always, as far as with recommendations for writers, but I have to say that's one of the few things I do say, read. It's like, I feel like it's kind of, I feel like that's coming at it from the right place of like, wanting to participate in this literary conversation that's going on, and being aware of the people that have come before you, and learning as much as you can from them.
Oh, yeah. We're going to kind of cut it off here because Reba is trying to get this pen from me. But I actually I had a quick question because I'm afraid she's going to pull the microphone out. Speaking of being a good reader, and correct me if I'm wrong, you were named after a character in a book?
I was.
And
so
what book was
my mom named me after from the Lord of the Rings, the character from Lord of the Rings. And of course, this was long before the movies came out. So as a little kid, nobody ever recognized what the name was from.
Of course, but were you force-fed the Lord of the Rings trilogy after that?
No, the funny thing is my mom never. She might have read some of The Hobbit to me when I was a little kid, but she read to me a lot when I was little. But no, I think I was. I think when I was young, I tried to read The Lord of the Rings too soon because I knew my name was in it. and it took me a long time to try to go back to it. It really wasn't that long ago that I read them for the first time, and I enjoyed them a lot. But no, my mom, like me, was an avid reader, and she read tons of poetry and Agatha Christie. I mean, she was all over the place, you know.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the atmosphere I grew up in.
That's so funny. Eowyn, I feel like we could talk for another hour. Hopefully we could do it again. Do you want to let people know of anything that's going on with you right now? Are you on social media at all or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm not. I'm on there. I'm not fantastic on there. But I am. I'm on Twitter and I have a Facebook page and all those things. So yeah, definitely can look me up there, and I'll if I see it, I'll try to repost. If you send me an email to your link, I'll repost the link to the podcast.
Yeah, no, most definitely. Yeah, no, most definitely.
Great.
Again, yeah, I feel like we could talk for another hour, but Reba is about to. Yeah, she's trying to get a pen.
No, this is great. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, this was a blast. Yeah, and again, so everyone who's listening, please obviously buy Eowyn's books. If you're going to buy them from the local bookstore. What's the local bookstore by you?
Fireside Books.
Nice. Okay.
Good Books, Bad Coffee is their website.
Great. And everyone in SF, go buy all the copies from Green Apple Books because that's our favorite bookstore.
Absolutely.
And this has been another episode of Writing Friction. Everyone, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time.